Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Or if you're watching during the week, good evening. I'm Bobby Childs. I'm sitting in hosting for OpenLine online show today. And yes, it is very hot here in the Northeast. We're in New York City in the studios of WBLS. And given the temperature today, we're probably going to get this real field temperature of 110. And if you're trying to figure out what real field means is you take the temperature, which will be about 97, 98, plus the humidity, and it's some new math that people have come up with. But I want to thank you all for spending today tuning in with us. And let me introduce you to my panel. One of our panel members will join us. But one of the founders of the show, OpenLine Online Show, the one and only Bob Pickett. So, Bob, welcome for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much.
And you need your mic so everybody can hear you.
Oh, okay.
See, the heat got to you already, huh?
No, I'm so used to hanging mic and so
Right.
forth. Yeah, I'm glad to be here and want to welcome all the folks out there tuning into us and as we talk about important issues as it impacts on them and our community.
That's great. And we have one of the history brothers, Mr. Larry Ham. Larry?
That's one.
That's right, one.
Good morning. Good morning. Glad to be here, and hope everybody is surviving this heat. Now, it may be 110 outside, but it's cold in this studio.
Yeah, the AC is cranking in here. Our other history brother, Achille Buchanan, he is taking care of some family business on the West Coast. The sports brother, Jamie Harris, is on his way, so he'll be joining us in progress. And the one and only Nitha Khan, unfortunately, she's taken ill today. I don't know if she got a little too excited on her appearance on Joy Reid, AM Joy, yesterday, so hopefully many of you got a chance to see Nitha share her points of view out there. But get well soon, Nitha. We, as well as the viewers, really appreciate you being on here.
Nitha is blowing up.
Yeah.
She's getting on. She's a freelance writer, and now she's getting airplay on some mainstream stations.
Yeah.
And she was on, what is it, Joy AM?
AM Joy.
AM
with Joy Reid.
yesterday. And did two segments.
Yeah.
Good for you, Nitha.
Yeah, and she's a frequent guest on Sirius XM on one of the shows out there. So, but let's get started. It's while we talk about it's hot out here, we're going to start with our top line story. And if you have been a frequent viewer of ours, we always stress the importance of paying attention to what's happening at outside of New York and in the political arena, because it has some ramifications as to what happens here locally. So we always encourage people to vote federal, at your federal elections, state elections, and city and local. So the story we're going to start off with was the recent decision by the Justice Department, led by Attorney General William Barr, to not bring federal civil rights charges against police officer Daniel Pantalone in the death of Eric Garner. And it's just so sad and unfortunate that one day before the 5th anniversary of Eric Garner's death, the Justice Department comes out and says, sorry, we're not going to bring any charges out there. Attorney General William Barr made a decision not to bring federal civil rights charges against the New York Police Department officer. He sided with Justice Department team from New York over the Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C., due to concerns that prosecutors could not successfully prove the officer acted willfully, a senior Justice Department official said. The decision to not pursue charges against the officer, Daniel Pantaleo, came after a dispute between the teams, the official said. Barr made the decision after viewing the video showing Garner's takedown several times and quizzing both groups of attorneys. The decision came, as I said, 5 years after the officer put Mr. Garner in a chokehold, and his dying words, "I can't breathe," became a national rallying cry. Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you as the legal scholar amongst us here. What's your take as to how this turned out?
Well, I'm not surprised, by the ultimate result because most institutional police forces they make every effort to try to protect their men, and especially at a level where it suggests that murder was the ultimate result here. it just appears that they did a shoddy job of investigating the underlying facts here, and the one person that's clear in this whole episode is the mother, and you really have to admire her steadfastness and willingness to continue to prove that her son was an innocent person and should not have been shot. It's a sad case. It really is a sad case, but you have to admire Mom here.
Gwen Carr, yes, Mother Gwen Carr.
Yeah. Admire her for her fight.
One of the controversies they talked about was whether it's a chokehold, and a chokehold has been outlawed for about 20 years in the police manual. And the argument by the defense was it was not a chokehold, it was a takedown hold. Larry, your views on that?
This is an outrageous decision, and the entire city of New York should be in an uproar over this. The murder of Eric Garner, it shouldn't just break our hearts. It should drive us to action. Once again, we see that there's two systems of justice in this country. There's one for the rich and the powerful and those who guard the rich and the powerful, the police, and there's another system of justice for the rest of us. And this is another example. When people say politics doesn't matter, this is clearly an example of how we see the intersection between the criminal justice system and the political system. Who made this final call after 5 years? Eric Garner's been dead for 5 years. This case has been in play for 5 years. Who made that call? William Barr.
Right.
Who was William Barr? Appointed by Donald Trump. Now, this is very interesting because it's not just Barr and Trump. It's also the Fraternal Order of Police. When Donald Trump was running for president, there were a number of groups that endorsed him. Among them were the Ku Klux Klan and the 330,000 member Fraternal Order of Police. Why did they endorse Donald Trump? Because they knew he would work in their interests. Trump is elected. Who does he appoint as the Attorney General for the United States? Jefferson Beauregard Sessions.
Yes.
An unrepentant segregationist and racist. And what is the first thing that Sessions says? One, they're not going to implement any more consent decrees because the cities all around the country were under investigation by the Justice Department. In the process of putting consent decrees and federal monitors in place, Sessions put the kibosh on that. He said, we're not implementing any more consent decrees, and we're going to put under review those that are already in existence. And we're not going to interfere with local police forces. And if that wasn't good enough, Trump gets rid of Sessions because Sessions recused himself in the Mueller investigation, the Russia investigation, because Trump wanted Sessions to actively block the investigation, and Sessions pulled himself out. But what does he do? He appoints Barr. And what does Trump say? He says, I finally got the man I needed. Like, Barr is the guy. He's been the cover guy. He's been the fix-it guy going all the way back to Bush. And now Barr is in place, and when the Garner case comes before him, he closes it and said, that's it.
In his pattern, that's a great point. His pattern, we saw this with the Mueller, right, which is when he feels that there's some ambiguity or some less than unanimous decisions, he will insert himself and lean towards the less popular side of it, which he's done here. And what's interesting, and Edward Latson, one of our dedicated viewers, he pointed out that this started under the Obama watch, right? When
Right.
you had Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch,
Right.
and they were unable to actually bring it. Now, they did set forth the civil rights investigation.
Right.
And so what you see here is the culmination of that, where Washington Civil Rights Division wanted to do something. New York City is the one that said they're not sure whether they can get it past the goal line out there. So Jamie Harris has joined us, the other sports brother. Jamie, what's your views as to how you saw this play out this week?
Well, as Larry said, it's it's infuriating, it's disheartening, but it's not surprising. As I watch this unfold, I never felt that this would end in favor of Eric Garner and in favor of justice. Trump, as you pointed out, Larry, he condones and encourages police brutality. Remember the speech he gave to law enforcement officials in Long Island roughly a year and a half ago, where he said, hey, if you slam their head in the car while putting them in the car, don't worry about it. As a matter of fact, slam their head in the car.
And where did he give this speech?
Long Island.
Long Island, yeah.
Long Island.
Right.
Right here.
Where you have a lot of officers who they live out in Long Island or
absolutely
up in
the
Upper
outer
Westchester
boroughs,
area.
yeah, absolutely. And so again, not surprised. And you said something regarding the city. This is something that de Blasio, who's now obviously running for president, and every city official should be backing and pushing in terms of seeking justice. This was murder. I mean, the video clearly shows it. He said over 10 times, "I can't breathe." You said it's a takedown, not a chokehold, and that's how it was ruled. And in terms of from a legal perspective, legal standpoint, nonetheless, anyone who watches that video, if you see anything less than murder, then you're not being objective, and you're not someone who seeks truth and justice, because there were so many different ways that they could have diffused that situation. Once they had him down, that was it. You had multiple cops there. He wasn't fighting after a certain point. He was dying. And so, I think that, certainly the Garner family, my prayers continue to go out to them and everyone who's been involved in this case from day one in seeking justice, because this is just an example, and again, a microcosm of what we see across the country. Rarely are law enforcement officials who commit acts of murder tried and convicted, and if they are, rarely do they receive harsh sentences, or the sentences that should accompany such heinous crimes, which is what they are.
Let me just say something real quick. Trump speaking in Long Island, shades of Ronald Reagan speaking in Money, Mississippi.
Wow.
Remember when Reagan, not Money, Philadelphia.
Yeah.
He went down there to send a signal to the segregationists.
And remember, Philadelphia, Mississippi is right in the area where Schwerner, Cheney, and the civil rights and Goodman were murdered.
That's right. He went down there to let them know that he was on their side. So Trump, with all these cases we have in New York, Eric Garner and the others that were going on nationally, he comes to Long Island to let the police know. And to say to them, Jamie, what you said, don't be nice, be brutal. Slam their head into the door.
Yeah.
What president would say a thing like that?
The one that we currently have.
That's right. And then the other echo I hear is Rodney King. Is it a takedown hold or a choke hold? Don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe what you saw on the tape.
And we watched them batter him with their clubs.
That's right.
As Jamie talked about, the mayor de Blasio, and so his response is a curious one, I would say, which is he said that he wanted to wait to see how the civil case would play out. First of all, how the criminal case would play out. So we saw how that one played out, no charges. Then I want to wait to see how the civil one plays out. No charges. Now he's saying, well, I have to wait for the internal investigation, and the investigation is going to end in one of three ways. Nothing happens to the officer, or he loses vacation pay, or he gets fired. And the mayor says he has to wait because he can't do anything with it. And actually, we heard this morning, if you heard on the radio side, Gwen Carr, the mother of Eric Garner, she said, no, he actually can do something. He can fire Pantaleon. And
Who was effectively promoted.
right. And but what he's afraid of is it will be appealed by the PBA. And then that goes back in the court system. So he's waiting for the investigation to play out, which then Commissioner James O'Neill actually would make the decision or the recommendation for it. But it sounds like he's just waiting when he can actually do something. And with the upcoming debates, Julio Castro has actually gone on record saying he has some questions for de Blasio to understand why
Yes.
he is not taking any action on this.
Yes, yes. And he should, on a national stage, certainly be questioned regarding this because, as you pointed out, we look at Trump, Sessions, and Barr.
Yep.
You know, the progression of Trump coming into office and saying, listen, we know before Trump was in office, there was this underlying, sense and belief that the police and white nationalists in many instances are one and the same.
Right.
When we look at police forces around the country, okay, Trump essentially was speaking to that particular demographic or segment of law enforcement and telling him, listen, I got your back.
Right.
I got your back. We'll make sure that I'll put someone in the DOJ, okay, who is going to protect you and defend you at every turn. As you said, first it was Sessions, a segregationist and a racist. Then we have Barr, someone who is an embarrassment to the Department of Justice. Right. Any Department of Justice official, and we see so many, anyone who's worked at FBI, Department of Justice, they're cringing at what he's doing.
That's right.
And he is unabashedly doing it. I mean, he's saying, listen, yes, I'm going to ensure that the status quo in this country, meaning for the privileged, and in many cases the privilege is law enforcement because they are afforded certain protections that citizens are not, that you are not going to be prosecuted or you are not going to be punished for your crimes. And so as everyone walks the streets, there has to be a concern that if I am an innocent victim, of police brutality, I'm not going to receive justice. And if I am the privileged, then certainly like Manafort, who the deputy DOJ official said, hey, no, we don't want him in the Rikers. Let's move him. Yeah. And so, as you said, Larry, when you are privileged in this country, and we see, fortunately, the judge in the Epstein case said, no, this is where it ends. But 9 times out of 10, you are going to receive favorable treatment and probably go unpunished, and it's unscathed.
Yeah. So I'm going to come to you with a question on this, Bob, in a second. But your point around, the rich and the entitled and everything taking place out there. You talked about Epstein. So one of the things that you see with Epstein, and you said the judge is putting a stop to it. Well, one of the things that's just come out is when Epstein was arrested and convicted in Florida, we all know he had this work release. But he had 2 officers accompany him on his work release. They were dressed in suits, and they were to address him as Mr. Epstein. Now, the justification was, well, he paid for the protection, but he's arrested, right? He's in jail. Almost $130,000, and they were to accompany him to his place of business and address him as Mr. Epstein. So it's just crazy. So, Bob, I want to turn to you in terms of what, put your lawyer hat back on. What advice would you be giving the family at this point? They didn't get criminal justice. They haven't gotten civil justice. They're pending to see whether there's administrative justice. What else could the family be thinking about?
Well, I mean, they could, continue to appeal the administrative decision to another administrative group, and just to test the theory of the police out. And I mean, the other alternative is for them to pursue a federal wrongful death case. I mean, they could always do that. I don't believe they've exhausted all of their court remedies just yet. it may very well be that they've exhausted their administrative remedies, but they may be able to pursue. I just don't know all the nuance of exactly what they did.
Yeah, well,
And how far they took it.
I would urge the family and everyone to support the family to engage in the protests that have been called. I believe the National Action Network, Kristen Foy, has been quoted as saying that the National Action Network is calling for 11 days of protest to match the 11 times that Eric Garner said, "I can't breathe." So they're going to be having protests all over New York City. My understanding is that they're going to be engaged in civil disobedience. I would really urge people to come out and support them. Don't throw in the towel. That throwing in the towel is exactly what those who support the Pantaleos of the world want you to do. They want you to get so despondent that you give up. Right. That's called psychological warfare. You don't even have to fire a shot. You can make the enemy surrender just by psyching them out. Don't let them psych you out. If Eric Garner's mother is calling for protests, go to those protests. If Eric Garner's sister or other family members, if the National Action Network is calling for protests, December 12th movement, International Action Center, these are groups that are always having protests in New York City. Go to those protests and support them. Tomorrow, the People's Organization for Progress, the organization that I'm a part of, we protest police brutality every Monday in front of the Federal Building in Newark, New Jersey. Every Monday from 4:30 to 6 o'clock. This Monday will be our 180th Justice Monday protest against police brutality. And tomorrow, when I say this Monday, I mean tomorrow, we will dedicate tomorrow's protest to Eric Garner and connect the death of Eric Garner to those who have died at the hands of the police in New Jersey. And we got a whole lot of examples in New Jersey, but we got to fight back. That's the only way we're going to put a stop to this.
Yeah.
And kudos to the city of Philadelphia. They're firing 13 police officers for racist and violent.
And Chicago on Laquan.
Absolutely. Facebook post. And, you know, certainly we see that with the federal officials and agents who also had very disturbing, violent, misogynistic, and racist Facebook posts. So the Philadelphia moved on that. They are firing 13 officers.
Yeah, you know, so I want to build on that point, which is when you see actions by officers like Pantaleo and others who, in my opinion, hide behind, well, we only did what we were taught to do, and we've said this many times, then that training manual needs to be burnt and rewritten. Right. I just feel bad for the police officers who do it the right way, who want to take care of the community, who know how to de-escalate, who are not posing after a takedown with a victory sign, who are not preening and sending messages saying, you know, this callous regard for human life out there. When you are a police officer, you are there to serve and protect human beings, not take them out. And as we know, there are many who they're distorted in their views around what policing is. And as a result, it besmirches the reputation of other people who are doing it the right way. So this is not an indictment against all police officers. So any bots or robots or anybody who's getting into our stream trying to distort stuff, cut it out. This is about individuals who do bad things and hide behind some nonsense rules that are in a book.
And anyone who watches this, you know, has watched this show for any significant amount of time knows that we have lauded and commended and said we have the highest level of admiration and respect for law enforcement officials out there who are ethical, who are moral, and who are for and serving the people. And that's what law enforcement officials are. You are a servant of the people, and you have far more good and honorable law enforcement officers out there on all levels, whether it be federal level or state or local levels, who are certainly doing the right thing. But as you pointed out, Bobby, it are those who, many of those who are not. And certainly so many of those cases have become public. So many of them have led to, fatalities. They are smearing and certainly giving the perspective that this is widespread as far as across the board with law enforcement officials, and we know it's not. It is a significant number, too many, but the majority are out there doing the right thing.
And I just want to raise this point. Why weren't more officers cited? There were a bunch of officers out there when Eric Garner was elected. Why wasn't the supervisory officer on the scene cited?
There are a lot of questions, and I know that Gwen Carr, the mother, she's also asking those same questions around what's happening to those other ones, because until the video came out, the reports, and we've heard this play out before, right? What the written report was differs from what the visual eyes saw in that video, and then they had to go back and recant stuff and re-clarify stuff, and
they were lying.
They were lying
on the written reports. They were lying, which is what they do often. They lie, but other officers should have been cited or indicted in this case, and the supervisory officer who had the authority at any point to intervene and say, "All right, cut it, enough."
We're gonna
go ahead.
Go ahead. Last word.
I just want to reemphasize again. Reemphasize.
I don't have a belt today. Go ahead.
His last point. Protests. I see some of the comments coming in. People talking about protests don't work. Let me tell you something. We're getting ready to observe the 400th anniversary of slavery in America. Do you know how many successful slave rebellions there were in the continental United States, in the 13 colonies?
Educate us.
None. None. But would we sit here and say that they should not have rebelled? No. Because all of those rebellions, in fact, contributed to the ultimate overthrow, because there would not have been an abolitionist movement if black people hadn't been rebelling. Protest always works. Is it the only thing we should do? Of course not. Don't be silly. There are 100 things we could be doing. Boycotts, letter writing, petitioning, all the different things. It's like when you go to war, you have many different weapons that you use in war. But I'm telling folks, people who say that protest doesn't work, you are helping the oppressor, because it's a form of psychological disarmament to tell people, don't act like you're hurt when we got your foot on when we have our foot on your neck. Just lay there and accept it. No, protest. It's not the only thing we should do, but it's one of the things we should do.
And you go back to Jamaica, Haiti, as you said, with the uprisings and fighting against and rebellions and rising up against the oppressor. And clearly, as you said, Larry, voices have to be heard.
So with that, we're going to move on. And when you think about really what the official statement was in this Eric Garner decision, which was that the prosecutors in New York felt as though they could not present enough evidence to win their case. Well, that seems to be a theme that is played out in other places. So earlier this week, impeachment bid, it just fizzled as the House on Wednesday killed an attempt to impeach President Trump for statements that the chamber condemned this week as racist, turning aside an accusation that he brought to his office. And they talked about how he ridiculed, disgraced, and disreputed the character. The move split Democrats, underscoring the divisions within the party over whether they should use the majority to charge Trump and try to remove him from office. 95 signaled their support. 137 moved to stop the current efforts in their tracks. So a 332 to 95 vote to table the impeachment article was drafted by Representative Al Green, Democrat in Texas. As we know, Al Green has been trying to bring apart articles of impeachment for quite some time. And it's a significant move that Nancy Pelosi, as she's been criticized for not helping move this. And again, the rationale has been we don't dispute something bad has happened. We just don't feel as though we have enough evidence to get it to the finish line. Larry, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on the failed impeachment this week?
Going to defer to Jamie.
We're going to go to Jamie. There you go. Yeah.
Well, I think it's just political calculus because there's more than enough evidence, and the Mueller report proved that. There's certainly obstruction, and it's not. Again, collusion is not the actual official term. It is conspiracy, not collusion. And Trump says, "Oh, there was no collusion." Well, no one has formally charged you or attempted to allege there was collusion. It is collusion, but from the legal standpoint, but it is conspiracy. And obstruction is clear. I do think that there is a split within the Democratic Party, as we know. And I think there is a fear that if they move forward with impeachment, and it's not going to get past the Senate. We know that. The Republicans control the Senate. Then it will empower and embolden Trump, and it will have an impact on the 2020 general election. I don't believe that. Are you willing to risk not impeaching him, moving forward with that, and then you get to 2020 and he wins? So what happens if he wins in 2020 and you did not? People elected, the Democrats won over the House in large part to fight against this racist, fascist regime. Right. And this lawless regime that we see, not administration, regime, because that's what Trump, that's how he views it. Right. So we're going to use the term how he views it. He views this as a regime, not administration. Right. And so the Democrats, again, too many of them are looking at their self-interest, and they're also in their own reelection prospects, and they're looking at 2020, the general, how this will impact it, when I think that is, without question, not the most prudent way to approach it and to view whether or not you're going to support impeachment.
Well, I want to commend Representative Al Green from Texas for putting forward, again, I think this was actually his third time putting forward articles of impeachment.
It's the first time it was voted on.
The first time it was voted on, but I think it's the third time he actually introduced a bill. And what's interesting, actually, I think this was the second vote.
Second vote, yeah.
Second vote.
Right.
This was the second vote because, and the reason I say that is because he actually got more Democrats on board on this last vote.
One, right.
They had, I believe, 95 votes
right.
For the impeachment. And I commend him because he's not, I mean, he did it almost like several months after Trump was actually elected. He and the other, the congressman from California, whose name escapes me at the moment, had introduced articles in
Maxine Waters?
No, not Max.
Congressman.
Oh, Congressman.
Yeah, as a congressman. But anyway, I commend them for standing up, and I agree with Jamie. I'm not going to reiterate what Jamie says. I agree with Jamie. I think the Democrats, I know they're in a tough spot. I know the long game that Pelosi is trying to play. She's a vote counter. She wants to make sure she has the votes. But sometimes you got to fight a battle even if you can't win it. Right. You know, it's like when I was in school and somebody wanted to fight me and I knew I couldn't beat them. Not showing up sometimes is worse than getting beat up. So because true. If somebody knows that they can scare you and you won't at least hit them back, they'll pick on you again. So I think the Democrats, and they don't have a lot of time to play with. The election is in 12 months. Right. So if they're going to impeach him, they're going to have to do something, I would say, this year. Because it's certainly going to be more than 6 months for them to even get to a vote. But I agree with you, Jamie. I think that the Democrats have no choice. I think it's inevitable. They did not vote down Green's articles of impeachment. They tabled it.
Correct.
Which is a good sign because that means they can bring it back. Yep. For another vote.
You know, Michael Dwyer, one of our viewers out there, says it's disheartening that the Democrats can't get this process right, as you walked us through. You know, so there was another situation this week that also had that same theme of the investigation's done, but no charges brought forth. And that is when the campaign financing charges, so this Southern District of New York was ordered, the FBI was ordered by the judge to produce these unsealed documents to show the payments, the hush money payments that Michael Cohen facilitated on behalf of individual number one, as it's listed in the documents, and everyone believes that is 45, to Stormy Daniels about an alleged affair that individual one and Stormy Daniels had. And what was curious to everyone, which is when you read what's in there, just as you said before about obstruction, it's pretty clear that something bad took place. But no charges were put forth. So Michael Cohen, who is spending time, is quite upset about that. And he tweeted out or sent a message out from his attorneys that he'd be more than happy to come in front of Congress to testify again. And the speculation is that they are still being hampered by the guideline that the Department of Justice has that says you can't bring charges against a sitting president, even though this took place before he was a president. And so, Bob, again, from a legal standpoint, have you ever seen anything like that where the investigation's closed, no charges are put forth, and how long could that stay open to be revisited?
Yeah, the short answer to your question is yes, I've seen it. At one point in time, some people might remember this, that I used to work for Vice President Hubert Humphrey way back when. Huh?
Your mic, yeah.
Yeah, way back when, and we never had any issues like this. It just depends on the nature of the allegations and whether or not there are a sufficient number of Democrats in this case who are willing to move forward. Some folks are not willing to move forward only because they would not want the situation to be them if they had to face it.
And let me say this too, Bobby. I give certainly the judge has to be commended because the judge
William Pauley III.
There was limited redaction. Mm-hmm. He said the American people need to hear this and they need to know the evidence, and so there was limited redactions, and as Bobby pointed out, there was clear obstruction. Now, the most interesting figure in all of this to me, and the person who can really provide, I think, the most damaging evidence against Trump, but won't, is Hope Hicks. And I do think if we look through, and again, this is an assertion, this is something that, an opinion, but just based on what we've seen, she has misled, certainly Congress. She has misled investigators, and she has essentially refused to answer very pertinent and significant questions. And, clearly her loyalty, is to Donald Trump. But when we look at, Bobby, when you read it, the conversations that took place and the timeline, a call from Hope Hicks, Michael Cohen.
Right.
I mean, and clearly this all leads back to Trump not only knowing, but in many ways directing and orchestrating, these hush money payments. And so there is no question. And as you pointed out, Bob, perhaps the evidence isn't strong enough and it's not, let's say, concrete in that from a legal standpoint, you could take this evidence, you could prosecute, and you could win this case. But it does seem, Bobby, I do agree with you that is it because you cannot indict a sitting president? Because from my, just layman legal perspective, this evidence looks very strong.
Yeah,
It is very
and,
strong.
and that's the speculation, right? Which is pretty clear cut, right? You have the check, you can follow the money, you have the timelines, you have the phone records, you knew the timing of when it took place. You have the history of him denying, being on record saying, I never cave in. I didn't have this affair. I never settle.
And remember, when he
then
was on the
settles.
plane with Hope Hicks, he said no.
Right.
Remember? So that clearly was proven to be a lie.
Yeah. So to me,
When he's on Air Force
to
One.
me, it is this DOJ piece, and again, the speculation is that once he is a civilian again, these charges are going to come off, and
Which is
and
why they're doing everything. And part of why he is, trust me, why he is so desperate to win re-election, because he's looking at the statute of limitations on a lot of these cases running out if he's reelected. Because if he is not reelected, then he is still well within the statute of limitations on so many of these cases and charges that I can't see how he will avoid prosecution.
Larry?
It's one of the things we have to keep in mind is that the perspective that a sitting president cannot be indicted is an opinion of the Justice Department. It is not the law.
Right.
There's nothing in the Constitution of the United States of America that says a sitting president cannot be indicted. This is a position that the Justice Department has taken over the years, and when I say years, I'm not just talking about the Trump years. This policy is the end of an evolution of jurisprudence dealing with the executive branch of the United States. One could argue that it goes all the way back. It might go as far back to Washington, but definitely, like if you take courses in business law, it goes back to Lincoln. You remember Lincoln had dismissed habeas corpus. You know, there was no precedent for it, you know. And a lot of legal analysts kind of cite that as the beginning of this drive, what many political scientists term as the imperial presidency. Like, we fought a war so we wouldn't have to have a king, but over the years, we have empowered our chief executive, the President of the United States, with greater and greater and greater authority, not derived from the Constitution, but derived from legal decision and legal precedent. It's a very dangerous course, and if we don't do something about it, and when I say do something, I'm not talking about protests here. When I say if we don't make some changes, make some clear laws or changes to the Constitution, this will happen.
And vote for the right representation in both houses, because these laws, as you point out, are eroding elements of the Constitution. The executive power, when Obama was in office, the conservatives were losing their mind and kept running behind the Constitution, the Constitution, the Constitution. You don't hear that same nonsense with 45
because it was propaganda.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And let me say this though, for legal scholars and political scientists, this has been a philosophical debate and concern for decades. Before Obama, long before Trump, that the executive branch was gaining, as you said, Larry, very poignantly, eloquently, too much power, and it was recognized that it was dangerous to this country when you have the president. And right now we see that we have a president who is defying the Supreme Court, who is attempting to defy. We have officials within his administration that are defying the legal system, defying subpoenas. And this all goes up to the executive powers, because Trump is saying no. We're not going to adhere to these legal decisions. And so when you give the executive branch, the president, that much power, what do you have? you have essentially you have a dictatorship.
Right.
Right.
And this points back to the path right now for both this campaign financing as well as the articles of impeachment. It require, and the Mueller report, it does require Congress and the House to actually do their job, right? Which is they have to, as you pointed out earlier, Larry, you can't sit back. You have to take your shot. It's hard to get a basket if you don't take your shot. You just have to, right? So coming up this week, we have Mueller, who will come out and testify again. And again, what we've learned with Mueller, the way he wrote his report, he wrote it recognizing he would be handcuffed by the DOJ guidelines, not law, and strongly encourage Congress to do what they're supposed to do. So I'd be curious to see this week what comes out from his testimony. Thoughts you have on it, Larry?
Well, I would not put too much hope in Robert Mueller, but Mueller is, how can I put this? Mueller is a team player. You know, as they say in the corporate jargon. He's an insider. He's a team player. You know, people had put all this hope in Mueller as if he was like some gunslinging sheriff that was going to come in and straighten out these varmints that we got in the government. And essentially, he broke people's hearts. He came out with a report that, number one, said the president wasn't guilty of anything. Well, let me put it another way. No. Wasn't guilty in collusion, you know, and that the case of that he didn't say he was guilty of obstruction, but he didn't say he wasn't guilty of obstruction.
Yeah, and to just be clear, he never said he wasn't guilty of collusion. He just said there's not enough evidence to prove guilt of collusion.
Right.
Because I believe he was very careful not to say that he was innocent of anything. So the double talk around obstruction, as you pointed out, which was we could not prove that he was not guilty, which when we all heard that, it's like, that. Have you ever heard that language? Pick up your mic, Bob. Have you ever heard a legal response that someone, we can't prove that they're not guilty? It's usually we can prove that they're guilty or they're innocent. Well,
there was ambiguity, and I'm so sorry, Bob, for jumping you here. There was ambiguity, absolutely, Larry, in what Mueller said he perceived. There was no ambiguity in the evidence that he laid out. And for me, that's more important. So I think everyone, and rightfully so, was looking for Mueller to make a definitive decision. Right. You know, to say, listen, this is obstruction. He obstructed justice. What Mueller said was, I'm stating that, was there obstruction? Was there not obstruction? But clearly it showed that there was obstruction. Yeah. So as you said, Larry and Bobby both, I think Mueller, you know, he's an institutionalist. You know, he's a guy who,
as our viewers call him, a company man.
He's an institution. He's someone who didn't want to in any way present I think this perception that he was biased either way. Yeah, he tried to be straight down the middle, but he did present the evidence.
He played it safe.
Yeah,
he played it safe and came out with a very mild assessment and an opinion as to what Mueller did. And so he was just playing it safe, ultimately, for other potential legal activities.
Yeah.
Gil Scott Heron did a piece in the 70s called the Watergate Blues. And he talked about Oatmeal Man. In the Watergate Blues.
Oatmeal Man.
Mueller is an Oatmeal Man. You know, I mean, I'm sure he's not. I don't say that derogatorily. I'm just saying that to try to characterize what he gave us as opposed to what people were hoping that he would give us.
And I would build off that. Say, I just think the expectations were so high as to what Mueller would do, and actually Mueller did what the textbook says you're supposed to do to do an investigation.
I
think Jamie's word was a good word, an institutional.
I see Oatmeal Man.
And we already see, and as we said 2-3 weeks ago, we knew that in the run-up, the Republicans would start, creating the narrative. Barr and the talking heads, that are nothing more than, communication arms. They might as well be working for the White House. Those are Fox.
Right.
But we already see what their playbook is.
Yep.
It's the Steele dossier. They're still talking about the Steele dossier as if the Steele dossier is what precipitated the investigation, which we know was not true.
Right.
And they're focusing on the FISA warrants. Well, were the FISA warrants illegally obtained? Did the judges, sign FISA warrants? And listen, all of that is smoke and mirrors. It's a smokescreen. It's a diversion. When Mueller, and I think it's important for people to hear, not just because most people didn't read it, to hear it. And even if he just repeats what was in there, that will just reinforce what we already know, that there was, again, was it 10?
Right.
At least 10 cases, clear cases of obstruction. And so after this, I'm going to be interested in seeing now what Pelosi's position will be, not just, rhetoric, but are you going to put, any teeth behind that?
Yeah.
Because I think after this, you say you want the hearings, you may not get the hearings, but you will get Mueller up there and he will restate what is in that report.
Right. So we want to move on to the most heated story of the week, which was 45 getting his political rally in North Carolina after he's been attacking the 4 freshman congresswomen, who, by the way, he continues to refer to them as congressmen and not congresswomen, where his crowd started chanting, "Send her back," as referring to Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota. And then his moonwalk from being defiant with it to the very next day saying he was unhappy with it, and then caught in another blatant lie, which says, well, when I heard it, I tried to speak fast to cut them off. When the video shows 13 seconds of silence by that man that allowed the crowd to go up, and there's been some reports that have come out that it was staged like everything else he does, which is his rally organizers. They're in the crowd and they start chanting things to try to get that mob mentality going on. And it was, one of the things that really struck me was if you watch that clip, there is a young white girl sitting there with a Make America Great hat on, and she looks bewildered at first in terms of what people are saying. And then she's hesitating to get caught up into what she's saying. And when you talk about how racism is passed down by generations, it is by exposing young, innocent, impressionable children to hate. And that's what I saw that night out there. Larry, what'd you see?
I saw an American Nazi rally. And Trump clearly, with this send her back business, has probably now solidified his characterization as the most openly racist president in contemporary history. Now, remember I said open because there was others who were just as racist, but they didn't exhibit it openly. They probably had it more in policy. But this clearly marks a transition in American politics. And, it's important that all of us stand up and come to the defense of Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, and Ocasio-Cortez, because Trump is trying to get them killed. Because, see, people don't understand. They just arrested, in the aftermath of that rally, they just arrested someone who threatened the life of Ilhan Omar. They just arrested that person. And whenever Trump starts this business, it's like the Manchurian Candidate. You send in a signal to these crazy racists that are out there, hey, go do your thing. Every time he does something like this, they get thousands of hate-filled telephone calls, letters, and then they get people following them around. And
And it happens on both sides. Remember, you had on the Republican side the softball game. Scalise got shot, and Manu got shot there. You saw it with the guy who had his whole van decorated with Trump stuff on it and sending out letters to Eric Holder and Obama and the Clintons. So you see it on both sides with this rhetoric, right? And I wouldn't be surprised if Rand Paul got death threats as well after he voted down and tried to stop the 9/11 relief fund out there. So you would think in this day and age you would try to temper stuff down, and we talked about police officers, right? De-escalate. Here you have the commander-in-chief who is lighting a match and walking away and smiling, saying, "I didn't start that." Yes, you did.
You know, it was interesting, and it might have been on Chris Hayes' show, so I hope I'm, giving the proper accreditation to that. But it played a video of a rally by former Alabama governor, now deceased George Wallace, who, by the way, was a Democrat. And ran for president as a Democrat.
Dixiecrats.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then they juxtaposed a rally that he had with Trump's rally this past week. And I mean, you could argue that Trump, as you said, Larry, Trump's rally was worse. And Wallace was an open racist and segregationist. And so, it's again, and Wallace was a Democrat. And so when we look at the political parties, as you said, Bobby, this, it's just not Republicans, it's Democrats as well.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be honest. And to see that, and to watch, as you said, Bobby, him sit back for, was it 13
seconds?
With the look of approval.
Right.
Let
the room fill.
Let the room fill. We know, listen, he ran on culture and race the first time and won. He knows he can only win on cultural and racial issues.
And fear.
Which accompanies the culture and the race. Fear. The fear-mongering. And so he's not going to change. He's only going to ramp that up because when he starts looking at the numbers, and again, he's going to lose the popular vote as he did the last time, no matter who runs. But this is a state-by-state race. And so he's identifying his base because he knows he's not going to expand his base. And he's saying, I am going to hold this base through, as you pointed out, Bobby, culture, race, and fear. Yeah. So he's not going to stop. He's just going to ramp this up.
So again, his blatant lying is just, so the arena that they were in Greenville, North Carolina, it holds 8,000 people. Of course, he said they had that's as much as it holds, and they claimed that there were 20,000 plus that were in there. Now, if that was true, it'd be a fire hazard, right? So that's not true, right? And he goes and he says, I could have got more in there because there wasn't enough room. Well, it's because it was only 8,000. Right. So that's one. His comments actually go against everything in the Constitution about free speech. So he's criticizing 4 women who are in political office for expressing their opinion. Yes. Which he did quite a bit as a civilian, and he had that right to do it. He's trying to suppress, to your earlier point about this authoritarian approach and trying to be a despot out there. And taking a step further, one could say that he actually broke the law because the Equal Employment Opportunity Committee, EEOC, they actually have guidelines and really well spelled out what constitutes harassment and bullying and racism, racist comments in there, which is they actually have in there telling someone to go back from where they came from. It is explicitly written out. He has violated that. So if they worked directly for him, which they don't, they could bring EEOC charges against him, which I think would be highly ironic.
Right. And kudos to AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who said, all right, I'll go back to the Bronx. Right. No, you go back. Yeah, we're going to go back to the country. And one of the things that, for me, is not spoken about enough by, again, a lot of these politicians who are so afraid, who show no courage, who show no character. They never speak about Eastern European immigration, where you have so many Europeans, the more people who are in this country legally overstay their visas. They're not coming across borders. They're not sneaking in. They're overstaying their visas. And we hear Trump keep saying the Democrats hate Israel, you know, that they hate America. I don't hear anybody questioning him on, well, wait a minute. You hate countries from which people of color are the primary inhabitants and are natives simply because you call those countries shitholes. Right? So I've heard no one say, well, is Israel and these other countries, are the people there more important? Are their lives more valuable than the lives of people who come from Haiti and countries in Africa? And they won't call him out on this rhetoric. The Democrats support Israel far more than he does.
Right.
Obama supported Israel just because he moved the capital to Jerusalem does not mean that you are a supporter of Israel, which you are not. But the narrative, they allow this narrative to be shaped and created, and too many Democrats are hiding and do not want to speak out on those issues.
So we got 5 minutes left before we wrap up. So I just want to close this one out because this will continue to have legs in the press around whether it was racist or not. By all accounts, for all of us here, it was racist. Being able to tell someone to tell you go back to where you are, and again, there are more and more instances popping up on social media where it's captured on video, where white people are telling people of color go back to where you are. Just one fact to share with you, right? In the makeup of the citizenship of the United States, 98% are either first, second, or third generation immigrants from outside the United States. 2% generationally were born here, and those are Native American Indians, and we've seen what has happened to them.
Right. Just quickly, immigration is very interesting. The history of immigration in New Jersey, in the United States, is very interesting. Just to say quickly, there was a time when Europeans from Southern Europe were vilified in the same way, say, that Latinos and Africans and people from other countries are being vilified today. But I'm making a long story short here. But in time, those Southern Europeans, Italians and others, even the Eastern Europeans and certainly Jews, were incorporated into the white polity. You know, they became white over time and made their alliance with those whites who now exhibited racist attitudes toward other peoples, mostly peoples of color.
Yep.
So yes, there was some antipathy toward other European groups, but that's over with, and now it's just, you know, it's just either racism toward the people of color that live within your borders and racism toward people of color that live outside of your borders.
Yeah. So we got a couple of fast stories I want to just hit. I'm going to hit the highlight of it, make one comment, and then we'll move on to it, right? So we have, in a couple of weeks, the next round of the Democratic debates coming on. And when I look at it from, again, that sports lens of, it was the 30th and 31st.
30th and 31st.
So I looked through it. I looked through the lens of matchups, right? So we're going to see Joe Biden and Kamala Harris matched up again. We're going to see Elizabeth Warren matched up with Bernie Sanders for the first time because they were on different stages before. And as I mentioned before, you're going to see Castro on the same stage as de Blasio. So what are you expecting to see, Larry?
Well, I think that de Blasio is going to get hit the way Buttigieg got hit in the last debate, when they asked him, well, a black person was just killed by the police in your town, and what did you do about it? And he stood there and said, I didn't do it. I wasn't able to do anything about it.
Right.
De Blasio is going to get hit with the Eric Garner case on that national stage. I will be surprised if they don't.
Well, Castro's already said he's going to do it.
He said,
Jamie, what are you expecting to see?
Much of the same. I think that now that Biden is not really the clear front runner, I think you'll see less candidates attacking him. And I think we'll see more candidates trying to establish their positions on immigration, and healthcare, because the last debate, it seemed like, they were trying to see what was the popular position.
Yep.
And so what I expect to see is people really clarifying their positions and platforms even more.
Bob, microphone. Microphone.
Okay, yes. I think we're going to see a number of folks going after our good sister, and I mean they're going to.
Kamala Harris?
As well as Booker as well, and because they are now sort of and very slowly rising in terms of
Booker's fading. Harris is actually rising out there, but they will. I agree. They will
understand
go after.
that, but right now the press is saying that Booker is still.
He's still there. He could wind up being one of the remaining, candidates after these debates.
Next story I have, right? So we know how the President of the United States seems to claim to be such a great business person. So did you know he's staying this weekend in Bedminster, New Jersey, his golf course out there, and that this golf course has a tax loophole. It is a golf course and a resort, and that resort is able to take advantage of a farm credit because he has goats on there. Do you have the goat farm image, gentlemen, back there? There you go. So he has a goat farm, and basically New Jersey, and it's something that when you get to talk to your friend Phil Murphy, you can ask him about this, that if to save lands, years ago, in New Jersey, they put forth this law that says to save lands, farmlands and everything, if you cultivate it as a farm, you get some tax credit. So versus paying about $80,000 in taxes, he's paying a couple of $1,000s in taxes because he has goats on his farm. See, go out there and get yourself some goats, Larry, and you save some taxes.
I want to give a shout out to Stacy, Greg, and others who have been conducting a protest every day, literally like a quarter of a mile away, because they won't let them protest in front of the gate of the, is it a golf? It's a golf club.
It's a golf course,
It's a golf club, so they have to be a quarter mile down the road, and they've been out there protesting against Trump every day.
It's a goat farm. Yeah,
it's a goat farm.
He has some hay. So there's another story out there. Berkeley, California, the city of Berkeley, California has passed an ordinance to try to make this a much more gender-neutral world that we live in. So they have actually taken writing in their city codes where they will not refer to a manhole cover as a manhole. It will be a maintenance cover. They will not refer to policemen. They will be officers. So they are looking at a lot of language that they use to make it gender neutral, and it's starting in Berkeley. Now, this is actually happening.
They're about 10 years too late.
Well, it's interesting how it is. But Canada has done this many years ago, where they have put this very gender neutral language out there, and I just think you're going to start to see more of it. So I commend them for it. I'm curious to see how long it's going to take for them to do that. The other quick story out there is rapper ASAP Rocky, who is in Sweden, arrested on assault charges. The president has said that he is going to pardon him, which you can't pardon somebody who is arrested in another country, just to clarify that. So he's working with the Swedish government to try to have him sent back home, which basically to me is interfering with the investigation because the investigation is still going on. He says that his wife, Melania, is the one who brought it to his attention because he doesn't know who the rapper is. And then
she did?
She had no idea who A$AP Rocky is.
And then apparently Kanye West, the president's friend, and Kim Kardashian has come out. But the NAACP, when this first came out, they were involved in it. So there's been others who were concerned about it. So we'll see how this plays out there. The last quick story I have for you is there's changes proposed to the U.S. Census test, the citizen test. So the Trump administration said that they're going to change, they want to upgrade it and refresh it. And they're quick to say, of course, people are going to speculate that we're trying to make the test harder to prevent people from coming in. I will go out on a limb to just say most people in this country couldn't even pass it, and they were born in this country. And I've had friends of mine who have taken citizen tests, and they've actually asked me some questions that I didn't get right. So I got a couple of questions for a few of you to see if you guys knew it. So
Is this your version of Are You Smarter Than the Fifth Grader?
That's right, yeah. So what are 2 rights of everyone living in the United States? 2 rights they have. Let's go to you, Larry Ham. Do you want to phone a friend?
Yeah, I do. 2 rights: freedom of speech and freedom of the press.
Well, you got it. Well, freedom of speech. The other thing that you're known for,
The right to assemble.
right to assemble. There you go. And the other ones are petition the government, freedom of religion, and the right to bear arms.
And the right to vote.
And no,
Constitution does not
No.
guarantee the right.
No.
to vote.
But what is one responsibility that is only for U.S. citizens?
Oh, the right to vote.
Is this
Right to vote, right. And the other one is serve on a jury. So I'm pretty sure if we were to ask our current president to take that test, by the way, the Gold Star member that he attacked in his campaign challenged him to do this, remember, that he would fail. And I believe that because of evidence that he refers to the U.S. Virgin Islands, that the leader of the U.S. Virgin Islands is the president versus the governor.
the president
right?
of the Virgin Islands?
And he has gone out many times to say that the aid that the United States provides Puerto Rico is a lot. Puerto Rico is part of the United States. So our president would fail this test is my guess out there.
And quickly mentioning Puerto Rico, of course, there are protests and rallies taking place in Puerto Rico calling for the removal and the resignation of the governor of Puerto Rico. And so that has been taking place now for several days. It is building momentum, certainly very intense. So to the people of Puerto Rico, our family, certainly this is an issue that touches close to home. And so, again, protests do work. And the people of Puerto Rico are putting that to the test by calling for the governor's resignation and ousting.
Right. On the sports line, Yankees continue to roll. Mets got a little winning streak going on. Big shout out to Mariano Rivera, who is going into the Baseball Hall of Fame. While I'm not a big fan of the hypocrisy of the Hall of Fame, I am a big Mariano fan. He is going in.
The first ever unanimous
selection vote out there.
Yeah.
He'll be joined by 5 others. Another person who played with the Yankees, Mike Mussina. You got Harold Baines, who I'm a head scratcher on that one, but that's for another time. You have Roy Halladay, deceased. And I'm forgetting the last 2 guys that are out there. But there's 6 of them that, Edgar Martinez is going in, and 5th one, I barely remember.
And Edgar will be the first DH.
Right.
The player who played most of his career DH, the first to go into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. So that's it for us this week. Hopefully you enjoyed. As I said, Fatim is out on a family excursion. Nitha is dealing with some a little bit under the weather out there. Again, in this heat, we ask you to take care of yourself, stay cool, stay hydrated, look out for your friends and neighbors, even the ones that you don't talk to. If you see them struggling, reach out to help them. This is a brutal period of time in there in the metropolitan area. So again, thank you again for tuning in. And as the immortal Bob Slade would say, get your mind right and keep a good thought. Thanks for tuning in.
And all the best to all of you.